A courtroom falls silent as a judge locks eyes with the defendant and instantly freezes. Why? Because the man on trial isn't just another criminal. He's the judge's childhood best friend. What happens next will leave you speechless. Loyalty, justice, and a shocking twist all collide in this unbelievable true story. Stay with us because the ending will change everything. It was a day like any other in Courtroom 3B of the Jackson County Courthouse. The chatter of lawyers shuffling paperwork, the sharp sound of heels on polished floors, the occasional cough or whisper from the gallery, all part of the daily rhythm of justice. Judge Michael Harris walked in through the side door at exactly 9 a.m., as he always did. The courtroom rose in unison, a sea of suits and uniforms. He nodded sternly, took his seat behind the large oak bench, and gave his usual opening line. Let's proceed. The case on the docket was one of the biggest the court had seen in months. The state versus Eric Coleman. The news channels were calling it the Coleman case, and had already spun it into a primetime drama. A convenience store robbery gone wrong. A clerk injured. A suspect with a criminal history. Public opinion had already found Eric guilty. But then, something happened that no one expected. As the bailiff opened the door and escorted the defendant inside, all eyes turned. There he was, a tall, slightly aged man with tired eyes, wearing an orange prison jumpsuit and shackles. He had a small scar on his left eyebrow, and his face was rough, weathered, as if life had been hard on him. And the moment Judge Harris laid eyes on him, he froze. Time seemed to stop. The judge's expression, normally firm and unreadable, cracked for the briefest second. His eyes widened slightly. He leaned forward. The courtroom held its breath, unaware of the personal earthquake happening behind that bench. Michael Harris wasn't just seeing a defendant. He was seeing a ghost from his past. Eric Coleman. Not just a name in a file. Not just another case. This man, now accused of armed robbery, had once been Michael's best friend. His closest friend. Back in the small town of Crestwood, nearly 35 years ago, Michael and Eric were inseparable. They had ridden bikes through cornfields, shared peanut butter sandwiches, and promised each other they'd stay friends forever. But life doesn't always honor childhood promises. After middle school, they drifted apart. Michael got a scholarship to a private high school. Eric, struggling with a troubled home life, fell in with the wrong crowd. Eventually, they lost touch completely. Michael had often wondered what happened to Eric, whether he'd turned his life around, started a family, or maybe just faded quietly into the background of adult life. Now, he had his answer. Right here, right now, standing in front of him in handcuffs. The courtroom stirred as reporters whispered to each other and cameras clicked. But they didn't know what Michael knew. They didn't recognize Eric the way Michael did. And Michael's heart pounded in his chest. He quickly looked down at the case file again, flipping back to the details he had skimmed earlier. Name: Eric Thomas Coleman. Age: 41. Date of birth: April 17th, 1984. Michael's hands trembled slightly. That was the birthday of his Eric. The one who once made him laugh so hard he cried. The one who helped him through his parents' divorce. The one who gave him half his Halloween candy just because he didn't like chocolate. It was him. There was no doubt now. Michael's voice cracked slightly as he cleared his throat. Court is now in session, he said, but the words felt like smoke in his mouth. He sat back, trying to mask the emotional storm building behind his calm facade. Could he do this? Could he sit in judgment over someone who once meant so much to him? He looked again at Eric. Eric's face showed no sign of recognition, just fatigue. Years of hard living had taken their toll. Or maybe he did recognize Michael, but was too ashamed to say anything. Either way, the moment was real, and it was heavy. Michael had sentenced hundreds of people over his career. He had seen hardened criminals, tearful teenagers, remorseful mothers. But nothing had prepared him for this. He felt a lump in his throat. He couldn't continue. Not yet. He stood up suddenly, his voice louder this time. Recess. 15 minutes. Everyone, please remain seated. Bailiff, meet me in chambers. And just like that, Judge Michael Harris disappeared through the side door, leaving the courtroom buzzing with confusion and speculation. Reporters turned to each other, asking, Did something happen? Is the judge okay? Why did he leave so suddenly? No one in the room knew the truth. That behind a robe and the authority was a man staring at the face of a friend he never thought he'd see again, and certainly not like this. The story was just beginning. Before the headlines, there were two boys racing through the sun-drenched streets of Crestwood, a small, quiet town where everyone knew everyone, and nobody locked their doors. Michael Harris and Eric Coleman were more than just best friends. They were brothers in everything but blood. From the moment they met in second grade, they were inseparable. If you saw one, you saw the other. Teachers would laugh at how they'd finish each other's sentences. Neighbors said they were double trouble. They had inside jokes no one else understood and dreams bigger than the sky. Every summer, they'd build forts in the woods, hunt for frogs near the creek, and pretend they were explorers on a secret mission. Every winter, they'd slide down icy hills on makeshift sleds, throwing snowballs and dreaming of being astronauts, firefighters, or even superheroes. Their bond ran deep, through childhood laughter and scraped knees, through family dinners and first heartbreaks. But while they shared a childhood, their paths started to split more sharply as they reached their teenage years. Michael's family, though not wealthy, valued education. His mom worked 2 jobs so he could attend a better school. He was disciplined, driven, and always carried a book in his backpack. Eric's story was different. His father left when he was 10. His mother battled alcoholism. Some nights, Eric stayed over at Michael's house just to avoid the shouting back home. Michael's parents treated him like one of their own, setting an extra plate at dinner, offering him rides, helping with homework. But the weight of a broken home eventually caught up. In high school, Eric started hanging out with older kids. He skipped classes, got caught stealing from a gas station once. And then again, it wasn't long before he was suspended. Michael tried to help, pleaded with him to turn things around. But Eric pushed him away. "I'm not you, Mike," he once said bitterly. "You don't get it." And maybe he didn't. Maybe he couldn't. Michael got a scholarship to college. Eric dropped out in the 11th grade. Their contact faded. Phone calls stopped. Messages went unanswered. Life, as it often does, moved on. But Michael never forgot Eric. He thought about him every time he saw a kid in trouble. Every time he ruled on a juvenile case. Every time he looked into the eyes of someone who just needed one more chance. He often wondered, where did Eric go? Did he get help? Is he alive? Now, decades later, the answer was standing in front of him in a courtroom, wearing chains. Michael could still see flashes of the boy he knew beneath the stubble and the tired eyes. That same smirk that used to crack jokes in math class. That same furrowed brow from when they lost their first baseball game. It was heartbreaking. The tragedy wasn't just that Eric had ended up here. The real tragedy was that this story wasn't unique. There were thousands of Erics, kids with potential crushed by circumstances they didn't choose. Kids who didn't have someone to catch them when they fell. And now Michael, the boy who once shared comic books and sleepovers with Eric, was being asked to sit in judgment over him. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was no longer the friend sneaking into the movies with Eric. He was the one deciding if Eric would go to prison. A knot formed in his stomach. How do you judge someone you once loved like a brother? How do you stay impartial when the man accused of robbery once shared your dreams and your backyard? As these thoughts swirled in his mind, one thing became clear to Michael. This case wasn't just about guilt or innocence. It was about history, heartbreak, and the haunting weight of what could have been. The courtroom was no longer just a place of law. It had become a place of memory, a place where childhood met consequence, and where two friends, once inseparable, now stood on opposite ends of justice, one in a robe, the other in chains. Behind the heavy wooden door of his chambers, Judge Michael Harris stood still, staring at the manila case file in his hands, but his mind was miles away. The room was silent, except for the quiet ticking of the old wall clock and the low hum of distant conversation from the courtroom outside. Yet inside Michael's chest, his heart was pounding like a drum. He flipped through the case file again, almost hoping the details had changed. Name: Eric Thomas Coleman. Age: 41. Charge: armed robbery and aggravated assault. Date of arrest: March 18th. All the facts were in front of him. The evidence appeared overwhelming. The crime had been brutal: a robbery at a late-night convenience store, a store clerk hospitalized, and Eric Coleman identified as the main suspect. But how did this man, the same boy who used to help elderly neighbors mow their lawns for free, end up accused of something so violent? Michael sat down heavily in his chair, his eyes fixed on the framed photo on his desk. A younger version of himself in his law school graduation robe, standing proudly between his mother and sister. He had worked his entire life to become the man who made hard decisions. He believed in justice. He believed in fairness. But nothing had prepared him for this kind of decision. Because now, the law wasn't just on paper. It was personal. In most cases where a judge has a prior relationship with a defendant, the ethical thing to do is to recuse oneself, to step away from the case, to avoid bias or the appearance of it. But Michael knew it wasn't that simple. This case was already under heavy public attention. It was being watched by the media, scrutinized by both political and legal figures. Delaying the trial could spark controversy. Recusing himself could lead to allegations of favoritism, or worse, derail the entire case, causing a mistrial. And the truth was, he didn't want to walk away. Deep down, it was something more emotional, a small hope that if he stayed, he might understand what had really happened to Eric. How the boy he once knew had ended up here. Michael stood up again, walked over to the mirror on the wall, and looked at himself. He didn't see a judge right then. He saw a boy who used to sneak cookies from the kitchen with his best friend. He saw a teenager waving goodbye to Eric on the last day of 8th grade, never realizing it would be the last time they spoke for decades. Now here they were, one on the bench and one in handcuffs. He took a deep breath. Then, he returned to the courtroom. As he stepped back in, the room quieted immediately. All eyes turned to him. With a controlled voice and measured tone, Michael addressed the courtroom. "Before we proceed, I must make a disclosure," he said. "The defendant, Mr. Eric Coleman, and I were friends in our youth. We grew up in the same town and shared a close relationship as children. However, we have not had contact in over 25 years. A wave of murmurs spread across the gallery. Michael continued, "Despite our past connection, I believe I can remain impartial and judge this case fairly based on the evidence presented. If either the prosecution or the defense believes my involvement presents a conflict of interest, you are entitled to request reassignment to another judge." He paused. The defense attorney whispered something to Eric. The prosecutor leaned over to her assistant. The courtroom waited, and then both lawyers nodded in agreement. They wanted the trial to move forward. Neither side objected. Michael gave a small nod. The decision had been made. The trial would go on, and he would stay on the bench. But deep inside, the real trial was only just beginning. Because now, Michael had to walk a razor-thin line, balancing law and loyalty, memory and reality, justice and personal pain. He would have to listen to evidence about someone he once knew better than anyone else in the world. He would have to look Eric in the eyes and pretend he didn't remember the boy who once called him brother. And he would have to make a decision, possibly the hardest of his life, that could either set his old friend free or send him to prison for decades. This wasn't just a legal dilemma. This was a deeply human one. The trial began under a thick cloud of tension. Cameras were banned from the courtroom, but that didn't stop the press from writing about every witness, every motion, every expression on the judge's face. Social media buzzed with theories and speculation. But inside the courtroom, there was only silence, law, and a growing sense of unease. Eric sat motionless beside his public defender, eyes cast down, lips tight. He hadn't spoken much since the trial began. His eyes, once full of life, looked hollow, distant. Whether it was fear, shame, or resignation, no one could tell. Judge Harris tried to maintain his calm exterior, but each time he looked at Eric, memories crept in like unwanted ghosts. He remembered Eric laughing so hard he spit soda out his nose. He remembered the way they used to sneak into abandoned barns and pretend they were hiding treasure. But the man sitting across from him now seemed like a stranger. Tired, beaten down, worn by the weight of a life filled with bad choices. The prosecution opened strong. They had surveillance footage from the store showing a masked man entering with a weapon, demanding money. A struggle. A shot fired. The store clerk was injured but survived. The suspect fled with cash. The footage was grainy, but the prosecution claimed Eric's build, voice, and clothes matched. They also had a witness, a woman who claimed she saw Eric running from a scene. The courtroom listened closely as the clerk took the stand. His voice trembled as he recalled the events. He pointed to Eric. "I remember his eyes," he said. "That's him." Michael watched Eric's reaction closely. No outburst, no denial, just silence. Then came the defense. They argued that the identification was flawed, the footage too blurry, the witness unreliable. They presented an alibi. Eric claimed he was in a different part of town at the time, fixing his sister's sink, but she couldn't confirm it. She was out of state that week. No solid proof. It seemed hopeless. But just when it looked like the case was slipping away from the defense, something unexpected happened. The public defender asked for permission to submit newly discovered footage from a gas station near the scene. A local resident had seen the news and turned it over, thinking it might help. Judge Harris allowed it. The court watched as the grainy black and white video played. It was late at night. A man, similar in build to Eric, walked into the station around the time of the robbery. He wore a similar jacket, same height, same walk, but as he turned toward the camera, one clear detail emerged. A tattoo on the side of his neck. A dark, swirling image, unmistakable. The courtroom buzzed. Michael leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Eric had no such tattoo. A simple physical difference, but one that could change everything. The prosecutor argued that Eric could have covered or removed it, but the defense quickly pointed out that Eric had never had one. Medical records and a full body scan from his intake at the jail confirmed it. And then came the final blow, fingerprint analysis. A partial print had been lifted from the store counter during the investigation. At the time, there wasn't enough data to match it. But with new forensic software, the print had been reanalyzed and it didn't belong to Eric. The courtroom, once silent, erupted into murmurs. Even the judge's gavel took a moment to bring order back. Exactly, but a flicker of something close to it. Michael felt the shift, too. His face remained composed, but inside, emotions surged like a tide. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about truth clawing its way through broken systems and human error. The trial was nearing its end, and the weight on Michael's shoulders had never been heavier. His old friend was not just a defendant now. He was a man who might have been wrongly accused, wrongly judged, and wrongly remembered. On the final day, the defense rested. The jury withdrew, and Judge Harris, left alone with his thoughts, stared at the bench in front of him. He thought about how easy it is to lose someone, not just to time, but to the world, to poverty, to violence, to pain. He thought about Eric, the boy he once knew, and wondered how many moments, how many choices, how many opportunities could have changed the course of both their lives. And now, after decades apart, after all the silence and scars, one verdict could decide whether Eric would finally get a second chance or lose everything for good. The room was quiet again. Tension stretched like a wire about to snap. The jury was ready, and what they were about to say would change everything. The jurors filed back into the courtroom slowly, their expressions solemn. Each step they took seemed to echo louder than the last. The room held its breath. Judge Harris sat still, hiding the storm of emotion building inside. Eric looked up for the first time in hours. His hands, once clenched tightly in his lap, were now trembling ever so slightly. Michael gave a small nod to the jury foreperson. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" he asked, his voice steady but low. The foreperson stood. "We have, Your Honor." The paper was handed to the bailiff, then to Michael. His eyes scanned the words, but for a moment, everything around him faded. All he could see was the boy Eric used to be, the one who once promised they'd both become heroes one day. He took a breath and read aloud. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Eric Thomas Coleman, not guilty on all charges." A collective gasp spread across the courtroom. The silence shattered. Eric's public defender patted him on the back, while Eric sat frozen, not moving a muscle. "Not guilty," The words hung in the air like a miracle. Eric blinked slowly. It was as if he couldn't process what had just happened. For a moment, he looked unsure whether to cry, smile, or simply breathe. Then, finally, his eyes turned toward the bench. For the first time since the trial began, Eric looked directly at Judge Harris. And Michael looked back. Neither said a word. But in that silent exchange, decades of distance seemed to dissolve. There were no cameras rolling, no headlines flashing, no reporters whispering. Just two men, once best friends, now standing on opposite sides of a life neither of them had chosen, reconnecting in the one place neither ever imagined they'd meet again. After the courtroom emptied, Michael stayed behind longer than usual. He removed his robe slowly, draped it over the chair, and looked around the empty space. The walls, the bench, the floor, they had seen countless stories of tragedy, redemption, guilt, and grace. But this story would stay with him forever. As he gathered his papers, he heard the soft knock at the side door. He turned. It was Eric. No handcuffs, no guard, just Eric, free for the first time in months, maybe even years. "Can I talk to you?" Eric asked quietly. Michael nodded. They stood a few feet apart, awkward at first, both men older, worn by life. There was no courtroom now, no rules, just memory. "I wasn't sure if you'd remember me," Eric said. "Didn't think you'd even want to." "I remembered," Michael replied. "The second I saw you." They paused. "I didn't do it, Mike," Eric said softly. "But that doesn't mean I haven't messed up. I've done a lot of things wrong. Just not this." Michael studied him carefully. "You've paid for a lot already, Eric. But this could be your second chance. What you do next, it matters." Eric nodded. "I know, and I don't want to waste it." For a long moment, there was nothing but silence between them, a silence filled with the weight of years lost and words left unsaid. Then Michael stepped forward and extended his hand, and Eric took it, not as a defendant, not as a judge, but as two boys from Crestwood who once shared dreams under a summer sky. As they let go, Michael gave a faint smile. "Take care of yourself." Eric nodded. "You too." He turned and walked out of the courthouse, this time not as a number in the system, but as a man with a future still left to write. Outside, the reporters swarmed, the cameras flashed, and the headline screamed. "Judge presides over childhood friend's trial. Ends in shocking verdict." But none of that mattered now, because sometimes the most powerful part of a story isn't the verdict. It's the reunion, the redemption, the reminder that no matter how far someone falls, there's still a road back. And sometimes, just sometimes, justice doesn't only mean punishment. It means grace.